Welcome to the Nonviolent Jesus Podcast. I'm John, Father John Deere, and today I'm speaking with longtime activist and church worker Wes Granberg-Michaelson. This is a project of www.beatitudecenter.org, where you can find many other podcasts and regular Zoom programs on the nonviolence of Jesus and practicing nonviolence and working for a more just, more nonviolent world. So let's begin, as we always do here at the podcast, with a little prayer. So I invite you, wherever you are, just to take a deep breath and to relax. Notice how you're feeling, and let's recenter ourselves. And I invite you to enter into the presence of the God of peace who loves you infinitely and personally and wildly and everyone everywhere. And let's welcome the risen nonviolent Jesus here with us. And take a moment to ask for whatever grace you need to follow him more faithfully and to do God's will. God of peace, thank you for all the blessings of life, love, and peace that you give us. Be with us now as we reflect together on your call to follow the nonviolent Jesus and work for a more nonviolent, more just world. Bless us, inspire us, heal us, disarm us, strengthen us, and send us out to do your will, to do our part to help end poverty, racism, corporate greed, systemic injustice, war, nuclear weapons, genocide, fascism, environmental destruction, and the whole systems of violence, that we might be your beatitude people, your holy peacemakers, and welcome your reign of universal love, gospel nonviolence, and peace on earth. In Jesus' name, amen. Well, it's a great blessing to welcome Wes Granberg-Michaelson to speak with us today about his beautiful new book called The Soulwork of Justice, 4 Movements for Contemplative Action, which is just out from Orbis Books. Wes is a writer, speaker, and global ecumenical leader working at the intersection of faith, justice, and public life. He began as an assistant to a kind of legendary senator from Oregon called Mark Hatfield in the 70s and 80s. I certainly remembered him. And then he worked with Jim Wallace and Sojourners magazine, especially with their board, for many, many years, and then was the director of Church and Society for the World Council of Churches, and now serves on the board of the Global Christian Forum and lives with his wife Karen in Santa Fe, New Mexico. You can read all about Wes and find out more about his book at his website, www.wesgm.com. I'm going to spell that for you, WESGM.com. So welcome, Wes, to the Nonviolent Jesus Podcast.
No, thank you, John. It's wonderful to be with you. I've so long admired your work and your witness, and this is a real privilege.
Well, thanks, Wes, and congratulations on your beautiful new book for Orbis called The Soulwork of Justice, 4 Movements for Contemplative Action. And I thought we'd just dive into the book, Wes. I mean, I'd love to hear more about your story, and maybe we can all do that someday. But, I'm very close with the publisher of Orbis, and he was telling me about you. And I couldn't believe that you kept a daily journal for over 50 years. And I have done the same. And, I think you're the only person I know, certainly only church person I know who's done that. I've been doing that since the 70s, since I was at Duke.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. I'm taking medication. That's a bad joke. But anyway, so you then, during COVID, you went back and reread all your journals, and you said you noticed these 4 movements that sustained you in your faith and activism, and that led to the book. And I thought, wow, that's very lovely and brilliant. And here we are, the collapse of the nation and the world, the end of democracy, and it seems the collapsing of the churches in so many quarters, and love itself, and a need for everyone to kind of recommit to the long-haul work of justice and discernment and creation and peace and the gospel of Jesus more than ever. And you're saying that after your lifetime, you discovered that you were practicing 4 movements of what you call soul work. So tell us briefly about all that led to the book, and then what are these 4 movements? And then
Sure.
I'll ask you
Well,
about each one of them.
great. Well, thanks, John. And you described so well the situation that we're now in. And I think it really calls for us to ground and root ourselves in the gospel that we know and that in the love in which we believe to make that real. I mean, there's all kinds of external action we need to take, but I'm convinced that that has to be rooted in this deep inner work. And I partly discovered that in my own journal and in the journey that I did. Um, I think, I discovered journaling when I was at Church of the Savior in Washington, D.C., which an ecumenical small church that stressed the inward journey and the outward journey always be integrated together. And frankly, that's where I ran into some of the practices that you know well from the Catholic contemplative tradition, the practices that really ask you to look inward and use that as a way for how you look and work outward. For me, a journal is simply a place where I could process the pain and the grace in my life. And I found that really helpful to do. And yes, I started keeping it when I was working with Mark Hatfield in the middle of the anti-war movement and then onward through the other external callings. I kept returning to places of retreat and places that could nurture my desire to look inward and to make sure I kind of knew what was going on and that I could kind of test myself and my own relationship to God in the midst of all that I felt I was called to do. So that led me to, as you said during COVID, what actually happened is that my wife and I were sitting in our home in Santa Fe, and she looked up at all these journals, on the bookshelf and said, "What are you ever going to do with those?" And I said, I don't have any idea." And she said, "Why don't you read through them all? And maybe there's something we could pass on to our 2 kids." So
Wow, that's
like you say,
beautiful. Yeah.
I started reading through them. It took me a year. And then, I developed, well, I wanted to give this to our 2 kids, but there was a lot more. And I felt in my journey, at least, there was a movement, first of all, from self-sufficiency to belonging. We could unpack each of these, but that
Hmm.
was kind of the first one. The
Hmm.
second, from certainty, meaning from rational certainty, I know this, to spiritual connection, to more experiential way of connecting to God and to life. And then the third was from grandiosity to authenticity, from a life that still revolves around the ego to a life where you really discover your true self. And then finally, from control to trust, from this obsession to sort of plan and strategize and control to a posture where we really learn that we can live in a stance of trust. Now, I don't want to say those are like platonic categories or for immutable things, but for me, those are the movements that I found helpful, and as I've shared with others, I think they help give a way of reflecting a bit about where we are in our journey.
Thank you,
Because
Wes.
frankly,
Yeah.
yeah, I mean, I just think self-sufficiency, certainty, grandiosity, and control are kind of the dominant traits in our culture, and I think they keep us imprisoned.
Wow. See, I was seeing that in your book and I couldn't believe it because I don't know about our age difference, but I kind of had the same experience during the COVID. And I
Hmm.
have a new book coming out with Orbis as well, much with many of the same themes.
Hmm.
Because self-sufficiency, certainty, grandiosity, and control, those are my strong points, man. Those are my best things. And
Yeah.
they don't work. And it's
Yep.
taken me a lifetime to realize that. And so that's why I wanted to talk about with you. And my book is called Universal Love. And I thought they were very, very creative, your little 4 movements. So let's go through them one by one, and you can just take a couple of minutes and talk about each one in general waves. The first you call from self-sufficiency to belonging, and you write there about, it's so lovely, it's so critical, and nobody's talking about this, the crucible of emptiness and love, and then belonging as our basic starting point, that the starting point of life in our soul, is belonging to God, belonging to one another, belonging to community, belonging to all of creation, I suppose.
Yep. Yes. Yeah. Well, the way this happened, I was on a 5-week retreat at a Trappist monastery. It was while I was working for Hatfield. I took this time off because I discovered life in a Trappist monastery and wanted to take part. And they had this program. And so I'm there, I'm living with the monks, and I walk into their library. I'm looking at books, and on the bookshelf, there's a book that says Self-Analysis by Karen Horney. She was a famous, psychologist. And so I pick it up and I start flipping through it, and I come to a description of neurotic self-sufficiency.
Great.
and I read this and I just felt, oh my God, I've been had. I'm reading me. I was a young guy. I was doing a lot. But I was really trusting in what I could do, and the fact was that belonging, relationships, community, things where I was really connected to others, it was very threatening. But because I was smart and because I was articulate and so forth, I could easily fend that off until I couldn't. And because, all of us at one point or another, we come to the end of ourselves in various ways. And I came to recognize that I simply couldn't go forward without a sense of connection to others. Without, in my case, it was a lot revolved around a kind of turbulent relationship with Karen, who's now been my wife for 50 years, and making that commitment and understanding what prevented me from it, the same way towards community. And then ultimately, as you say, John, it's belonging to God. What does it really mean? Not to believe, but to belong. And I think that experience also connects us in a way that we belong through God's love to all creation. And that opens up the pathway to encounter the violence and the war and the suffering that is so much a part of our life today.
So rich. Just a little side question. We both must be mutual friends of Henry now, and you must have known Henry through
Yes,
Sojourners.
absolutely.
So, this is a lot of Henry's work and ministry, is inviting people to belonging. Did you get some of this from him, or you just were on a parallel path? He was writing about this, back when you were discovering it.
He was. Yeah, I remember he wrote that little book and talked about from moving from hostility to hospitality.
Yeah, it was
reaching out. Yeah, both my wife and I read Reaching Out. We were very, very impacted by it. And yes, I knew Henry, and we were, because at the time when I was in Sojourners, he was coming around, and we had.
It just reminds me of him, and it's such an important lesson for us all to move from self-sufficiency to belonging. And maybe it's interesting, you were talking about in the 70s, and now here we are all this time later. So it is a question of age and wisdom and the journey and learning. That's the spiritual life. Okay, your second movement, from certainty to connection. Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
So you're writing about discovering faith after doubt. You have to unpack that. Experiencing connection. You write about something so beautiful called sacramental connection. Mm-hmm. And then I suppose moving into, well, this is just so beautiful, permanent connection with God and living in the sacred spaces. In my new book, I talk about, well, I guess it's too hard to, being completely open to God, but there are like we have a connection, but most of us, there's something blocking the connection. There are
Yeah.
obstacles. It's like one of their valves, their arteries in our heart are blocked. And I
Yep.
didn't know
Yep.
that my whole life. And the
Yeah.
journey is full on open heart connection to God. So tell us about certainty to connection.
Well, it sounds to me, John, like our books are interchangeable.
Yeah, no, yours
I'll
is
be,
better.
really look forward to reading yours. And I know we both enjoyed Robert Ellsberg so much and just working with the folks at Orbis. So that's a little commercial for them, but they deserve it. Um, well, look, I think, my background was as a conservative evangelical. That's how I was raised. And so rational certainty was really important. And then I kind of moved from there into the Reformed tradition. And well, there again, you got to put down what you believe in these tight confessions and memorize them and, know that rationally this is how we can be certain. And you could speak for yourself the way this functions within the Catholic community. But I'll tell you, just about everyone that I've encountered in their spiritual journey, this falls apart. And it may be through a tragedy, it may be through just their own curiosity, it may be through other traumatic events, but the the certainty we have begins to crumble. And then we find ourselves at a really critical point. There's all this stuff today about deconstruction, people in various places of deconstructing their past faith, and the challenge is, well, how do you put it back together? But I don't think you get it back together unless you really encounter the reality that faith and doubt uh, are, are together in a way that really works, and that faith is not belief. There's a big difference between belief and faith. Faith is much deeper. And I think we're drawn at those points not to construct a better system of rational certainty. Some people try to do that. I think we're drawn to experiences of connection. And they may be connection to nature, to God's creation. They may be through connection to others. I think often it comes in experiences of the sacraments, and both narrowly or broadly. I really do believe in a kind of a sacramental theology that allows us to be really open and impacted by God's presence in the ordinary things of life. And of course, that centers in the ordinary things of bread and wine, and then moves out. You probably saw Conclave, that great movie, and the movie, the price of the ticket is the speech that the Secretary of the Bishops gives at the beginning when the cardinals are going to go into their conclave, and he warns about a faith in which is ruled by certainty and in which there is no doubt. I think that true faith goes through that process beyond doubt, that rejects rational certainty but clings and experiences points of connection through which we are certain in a whole different experiential way of who we are before God and of God's presence with us and in the world.
That's so lovely. I'm thinking of my friend Richard Rohr. You must know him
Yeah,
too. And for,
yes, I do. Yeah,
decades ago, I remember he was telling me about, I didn't know what he was talking about, to be honest, but he was, because I was a young whippersnapper, and he's saying,
yeah,
John, it's permanent liminality. And I'm going,
yeah,
okay. I don't know what. But he's talking about where you're walking on water. Every minute is walking on water, like Peter out to Jesus. There's no, it's that's why I totally agree that the word belief is too complicated. And even
yeah,
faith now I'm not using so much. It's more like trust, but
yeah, yeah.
100% trust and
Trust. Yep,
surrender.
yep, yep.
These are great, great themes. And that you were working on them throughout your life in the journal is very moving to me, because
It was.
I was trying to change the world, but I wasn't doing this. And I did a lot of inner work, but not to this level, I don't think. So then your third movement.
What you say, just a second, what you say about liminal space, and Richard, I'll just say the best example of liminal space I ever heard is that when you look at a trapeze artist and he or she is swinging from one bar to another, there comes a point where he or she lets go of the one bar, and before she grabs the other, that's liminal space.
You remember Henry Nouwen was going to write a great book about that. He used to write me letters about it. He didn't live to do that. And
Really?
So he's saying the whole Christian life is you're flying through the air. But what he realized, because he became friends with this Dutch circus group, best friends, and was that the flyer, we think you're going to go out and catch the arms of the guy hanging. If you do that, you break both your wrists. So the flyer has to have his arm stretch out, and the catcher has to catch you. And if you move, you're screwed. You'll die. You'll both die.
Wow.
And God is the catcher. And Henry just thought that was the greatest image of the life of faith and this liminality.
I have
isn't
not
that
heard that.
wonderful?
That's perfect. That's perfect.
A friend of ours finished the book, kind of rewrote it, and I forget the title. Yeah, but people can look it up at henrynouwen.net. Okay, so then you got a third movement. Also, my good strong point, from grandiosity to authenticity. You write about how pride can develop into grandiosity, and wow, we see that all over the country and all over the world. I see it myself, and out of control ego, self-centeredness. And I'm talking here about church people and people who care, peace and justice people. I mean, this is the problem with the good religious authorities in the Gospels. They end up killing Jesus, but they are full of themselves. Yeah. And as we all are, and it's a power trip and an ego trip. And that always leads to a crash, you say, and that therefore strength is found in weakness, and as Henry wrote, being the beloved of God. And then you call us to living authentically and humbly in our true self with others and God. So walk us through grandiosity to authenticity.
Well, you've really summarized it well, John. Grandiosity is just in the water in our culture, and particularly in the political culture.
Yeah.
And like you say, I see this, not just in the people like Trump, who's probably the best clinical case of grandiosity and what effect that has on the world, but I see it in those who are leading the movements against Trump. And I see it in a lot of friends who are great activists and in church leaders. And I've witnessed those whose unchecked grandiosity, it becomes highly narcissistic, and they've got all kinds of external stuff that they feed off of, and it finally results in disaster to them personally, or disaster to the movements that they're leading. And for that reason, I just think it's so important that we learn in the midst of whatever we're doing externally to keep asking, where am I discovering my true self? And where am I really knowing that I'm beloved, not because of anything I do, but because of God's action to love me? And that transforms how we can live. It's interesting. We've been referring often to Henry Nouwen. There's this quote in the book that I've tried to live by. He talks about what it means to be the beloved. And he, of course, is thinking of the son who returned as the prodigal son to his father. And this whole reflection came off of when he looked at Rembrandt's painting of the prodigal son and wrote the whole book about it. But he says this: as the beloved, I can confront, console, admonish, and encourage without fear of rejection or need of affirmation. as the beloved, I can suffer persecution without the desire for revenge and receive praise without using it as a proof of my own goodness. I mean, I say to folks, put that on your home screen. Live by that. I mean, that's what it means to try to be learning to live a life that's rooted in authenticity.
That's so beautiful, Wes. What would be the word authenticity is complicated for me. What would be another way to
Okay.
say it? You're saying the truth self, Merton's
True
phrase.
self, it's what Merton and others.
Yeah. What is there a
you
gospel
find.
phrase for that? A word in the Gospels? Maybe not. I don't know. If that authenticity, I think we're all broken. As
Yeah,
Henry said, everybody
yeah,
is wounded. So Henry was
yeah,
such a genius, saying you're either going to be a wounded wounder or a wounded healer, and that's a conscious daily choice
yeah,
of prayer.
yeah.
Um,
I think that some of the gospel or scriptural images that refer uh, to becoming a true son, a true daughter.
yeah, the
These,
beloved. Yeah,
the beloved.
yeah,
I think that sort of gets at it better. I mean, yeah, authenticity. You know what I'm after, but it also that's used a lot in kind of secular psychological ways, and if you talk about living as the beloved, in the Orthodox tradition, it really means living into the inheritance of what it means to have God within us.
well,
Um,
and Jesus. I mean, if anyone should have practiced grandiosity, it was him.
yeah,
And he says in Luke, "I'm gentle and humble of heart."
yeah,
It's shocking. He's so gentle and humble, and that would not be a way to describe the way I've operated.
no,
This is
no,
such an indictment for me as I'm listening to you, but it's a grace because I've gone through the same thing through the pandemic of really trying to
yeah,
break through. I do think it's a question of age, as a friend told me recently. Getting older, we get a little wiser, maybe, and maybe we're
I think
forced
it
into
is.
humility.
I think it is too. I think there's one other thing I've thought a bit about, John. You and I were both kind of active early in that
Yeah,
time in
yeah,
the 70s
yeah,
and now. And, there are parallels externally to the kind of threat and breakdown and corporate evil that we saw then
yeah.
and that
That's
we
very
see
true.
now. And
Yeah.
and I think that maybe we think back to how we responded then and then can put it into a better perspective of what we might be able to do now. And for some of us who are at this point in our journey, that might resonate.
It's so beautiful. Well, calling us to live authentically and humbly as our true selves with others. Then you talk about a fourth movement of your life, which is also another way of saying the same thing. It's so powerful. From control to trust. Another way of describing, I think, the spiritual crisis. It's not just a political crisis in the country or the churches. It's ultimately a spiritual crisis. We all want to be in control. The church is in
Yep.
control, and it's another way of ego. I'm in control.
Yep.
Therefore, God, by the way, you're really nice, and Jesus, I really like you, but I got this covered. I'm in
Yep.
charge. I'm doing it.
Yep.
So you call it the illusion of control. That's kind of
Yep.
controlling us all. And we all try to control everything. And my whole life I've worked for peace, and I was facing 20 years in jail, prison, Wes,
Mm-hmm.
and I was
Mm-hmm.
in control. I was
Yep.
still,
Yep.
and so I'd like, God, I got this down. I don't really need you, but I think I'm serving God. And then I think, and maybe you write this: do we really want God? Do we?
Mm-hmm.
The
Yeah.
inevitable path, painful path you call us to, of relinquishing full control to God.
Yeah.
That's really the spiritual journey, learning to let
It
God run
is.
our lives, and that's trusting God. That's why I wanted to have you on, because that's where I've been at the last 5 years,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
trying to change myself and move into that. So teach me all about that.
Well, it's you probably know David White, his poetry,
Yeah, I know
Celtic.
David. Yeah, such a
Yeah,
great guy.
well, I've never met him, but
Yeah.
in this poem, "What to Remember Upon Waking," he has this one line that I keep quoting. Uh, what you can plan is too small for you to live.
That's so beautiful.
Um, and I love that. I'm on I'm on the board of our local Trout Unlimited chapter, and we had a meeting last night, and we had a really earnest person gave a good presentation about their strategic plan. And I've just given up on strategic plans because I think we think in a secular way. You plan, you strategize, you control, you get measurable outcomes, and that's how you do it. And then we kind of imply that in our own spiritual, personal life as well. And the fact is that just external events. Take COVID. Take the murder of George Floyd. Take the raging forest fires in this part of the country. Take so many events that we could never plan that totally wipe out our ability to think that we're in control. And that's kind of a metaphor for, I think, what happens in our own personal lives as well. It's I don't know. There are lots of ways to think about it, but Meister Eckhart has one line that says, "God only asks that you get out of God's way and let God be God in you." I like that a lot. To get to a point of trust where we really recognize that we kind of relinquish our ability to think we are the masters, that we are the ones who can make everything happen, which is so ingrained within our culture, and to be at the point where we are resilient because we're looking for grace. We're looking for where God breaks through. We're looking for what God seems to already be doing and moving. And then we try to simply participate in that. And of course, there's no better time to think about that than Advent as we begin to approach.
It's so rich. What the shocking breakthrough. This is so embarrassing. I shouldn't tell on myself, but it's humiliating that during the COVID was I realized, wow, if I let go of control and God runs the show, things turn out better. I think I know better than God. Now, I used to say I am 99% surrendered to God. Isn't that impressive, Wes? And even if that were true, which it isn't, it's baloney because that 1% I'm hanging by on the limb,
Sure.
and I'm in charge. I'm not letting go and letting God. Now,
Yeah.
so my practice, that's why a whole new book is about surrendering and doing God's will. And I've written about it so much. Not my will, your will be done. And I was walking up in Big Sur with my spiritual director, monk friend, and I said, hey, I think that's the only prayer. Really, in the end, it's the Lord's Prayer, it's Gethsemane, it's what Mary says to the angel, not whatever God wants. That's all I'm about. And my friend goes, oh, yeah, well, we were walking, and he didn't even look up. He said, oh, I say that at least 1,000 times a day.
Oh, my gosh.
Yeah,
oh,
and well,
if
you're a hermit in Big Sur, you will. But it was very powerful. And another angle, and I'd like you to, say more about this, but Jesus kind of says this. He's modeling this for us in John's gospel, where he says, which I never understood this sentence, but I can do nothing on my own.
Yeah.
And I think that means if I am he's teaching us how to be a human being. If you're totally self-sufficient and in control, your life is a disaster. You are going to, but if you surrender everything 100% to God and let God use you, and you're not coming up with a 5-year plan or 1-year plan, a plan for tomorrow, but you're going to say, hey, God, if you want to even use me to help get rid of nuclear weapons or whatever, fine, I give you permission. all these miracles will happen. And I've known so many saints who've done that, and they were trying to tell, Daniel Berrigan tried to tell me this for 30 years, and I didn't know what he was talking about. So say more about all this.
Well, and I think it's really relevant to what you've given so much leadership to, John, around the nonviolent call, the nonviolent Jesus. You see, I think that we can't get to that real point of a nonviolent witness if we aren't dealing exactly with self-sufficiency, certainty, grandiosity, and control. And I think that we see in Jesus, in his call to love our enemies, and then in the way he laid down his life and the way he poured out his love, we see a real example. And you can be called. You've dealt with this your whole life and witness, John, and people can be called to nonviolence out of a philosophy, out of an ideology, or they can look to inspiring examples. But if you're going to live in a nonviolent witness, I think you have to live at the point of belonging and connection and relinquishment, because that's really what it's all about.
I totally agree. And why did it take my whole life to learn this? I guess, again, I'm going to keep giving thanks and saying it's a grace that I finally, God is getting through to me, or trying to. So the word I've been using is surrender in my new book. You use relinquishment. So it's all these things, breaking that down.
It is.
But
it is.
To our listeners, what you all don't know is that Wes and I had the same spiritual director. For me, Wes, it was like 15 years in New Mexico, and he was a total saint. Brother Joe, I'll just say that. And Joe, Wes, just laugh. I'd see him once a month for 15 years, and he's trying to teach me to let go. And he keeps saying, John, the whole journey is kenosis, Jesus' self-emptying love. And I go, huh? And now it all is so clear to me. So I said to Jim, now my other really great friend was Reverend Jim Lawson, who was the great strategist and thinker of the civil rights movement, one of Dr. King's best friends, up until he died. And he died, I guess, a year or two ago. And shortly before he died, I called him. I said, you're getting to know me, Wes. I was like, Jim, I figured it out. Nonviolence requires total surrender to God. You can't be nonviolent if you think you're in control and self-sufficient and you're in charge. You have to let God be in charge. And he goes, wow, I never knew that. And of course, he died. And then a couple months later, I found a quote from Martin Luther King, where Martin King said, around 66, nonviolence requires total surrender to God. Of course, Dr. King knew all of that. So expand on this, and then we'll end with your 8 points about kenosis. Because nobody talks about Jesus' self-emptying love, that the cross is political. It's resistance.
Absolutely.
But it's also total inner letting go and trusting in God can use this disaster of resistance.
I think, I think in the cross, what you see is that the experiences of deepest trauma and pain and even death are accompanied mysteriously with this faithful flowing out love of God, and that's really what we see happening there, and it gets translated into our lived experience, and I think gets translated into our historical encounters, how we try to witness in the world. I think that people are called finally to examples of those who have learned to live this way. And when you think of the people whom we cite, or even go back in history, whether it's St. Francis or other real leaders, or one example I often like to cite is Dag Hammarskjöld, this famous Secretary General of the UN, who's dealing in all this peacemaking work, and he dies. And it turns out he kept a journal. It was published as markings, and W.H. Auden wrote the intro. And here you find a life that is shaped by readings and influences by people like Meister Eckhart and many others. And you suddenly see, yes, this person was also living at that level. And one way or another, it does all go back to the example of Jesus, uh, who who on that last night simply poured himself out and washed the feet and gave himself all over and said that prayer that you just said, John. Not my will, but thine be done. We've gotten so captured by either the individual friend who is Jesus, or the all powerful, Jesus who was king. Like next Sunday's Christ the King Sunday, and that's always a little bit problematic. I think the real message, the real model of Jesus is this one whose whole life embodies this constant outflowing, boundarless love of God.
Yes.
He's living in that love.
That's so beautiful. Well, we're really out of time, and you end in the book with, you call them 8 roots to ground our work for justice, and I'd like you to read them and then just offer any other concluding
Sure.
thoughts, and we'll
Well,
end. And I loved these. They're kind of your lessons of soul work for the
yeah, it's
work of
at the end of
justice.
all this, I kind of thought, well, if you're an activist like we are, and you read this, well, what can I learn? What should guide me? Well, this is what I think. Number one, you know that this world belongs to God. This is God's world. Number two, you know that your engagement with the world has a spiritual foundation. In other words, you're not just reacting around ideology and politics. It really is deeper. Three, you act on the basis of call. You're not acting out of like, what's the most urgent? No, what are you deeply called to? I mean, the way a person like Archbishop Wester he knows he's called to an anti-nuclear witness. Fourth, your action is steadfast and committed to the long term. This you're in touch with the flow of God's love into the world, and that's going to keep you going. And five comes from that, you display resilience. It's not in planning and control, but it's in our ability to have the inner strength and discernment to respond. Fifth, you are detached from your ego. I like one definition of prayer is detachment from the fruit of your actions. It's not about you. And then seventh, you don't demonize your opponents. That's frankly, John, that's one of the hardest ones for me. But if you really believe what we say about the image of God, you get beyond binary thinking, and you don't demonize your opponents. And finally, you are rooted and grounded in love. It's that passage from Ephesians 3 that is so, I think, important to me, that a love that is so spacious, so beyond knowledge, but it is to captivate our inner being.
Wow. Well, thank you so much, Wes Granberg-Michaelson, for speaking with me today. And I urge everyone to get his beautiful new book, The Soulwork of Justice. And thank you, friends, for listening to this episode of the Nonviolent Jesus Podcast. You can hear many more podcasts and other upcoming Zoom programs at beatitudecenter.org. And please consider offering a donation to support this free work. If you can, please leave some positive feedback or review at the National Catholic Reporter online, or Apple or Spotify or YouTube or Substack, whatever platform you use. And help spread the word about the podcast. That's really the best way we have, by telling your friends and churchgoers about this. May the God of peace bless you all. Keep on following the Nonviolent Jesus. See you all next time.